We have a very special guest tonight. He's a friend of our church. He's been here on many occasions before, but we are delighted to welcome him back. Help me welcome Ronnie Simone. You get that chair. For those of you that don't know Ronnie, we met him as a tour guide. But he is much more than that. He's now retired from the IDF, but he retired as a lieutenant colonel. He's an author. He's written several books on the history of Israel. But more than all of that, he's a good friend. I'm going to tell one personal story, and then I'm going to let him talk. But to give you just a glimpse, this is more than just a church service. I was in Jerusalem. Kathy and I were in Jerusalem a few years ago, and it was a Friday evening, and we were on our way to speak to a Russian congregation. There are a lot of Russian Jews that have immigrated when the Soviet Union unraveled. And my phone rang, and my parents were coming into the country, I knew sometime that evening, and on the other end of the phone was my mom. And I could hear a siren in the background. And she said, "Your father collapsed in the airport." And they couldn't resuscitate him until they came with a defibrillator in the airport. She said, "We're in the back of an ambulance. One of the attendants gave me his phone. I don't know where we're going. I don't know where I'm at." And I said, "Well, I'll find you." And we hung up. Now, Friday night in Jerusalem is Shabbat, and everything is closed. It's like everything is closed. And I picked up my phone and I called Ronnie. And I said, "My dad's in an ambulance, and I don't know where they're taking him. And he said, "I'll pick you up in 10 minutes. And by the time he pulled up in front of my hotel, I climbed in his car and he knew where they were. He doesn't like me to tell it, but he's a hitman for the Mossad. That's not exactly true. But he picked me up and drove me to the hospital where my dad was. And I walked into the critical care unit and he was alert. And I said, "What have you done?" True story. He said, "Well, I wasn't that far gone." So we still have a little debate at our house about how far gone you want to be before you come back. But welcome back to Tennessee, Colonel. We're glad to have you.
Thank you, Pastor.
You've been talking a lot this week about the history of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem is back in the headlines these days, or Israel is back in the headlines, largely because of what's been happening on the southern part of Israel, on your border with Gaza. October the 7th, I think, changed Israel and the Middle East. It'll be one of those pivot points in the history of that region. Can you talk to us just a little bit about how that felt, what it meant, what it means to the Israelis, what happened that day, and how you're responding?
It was indeed Saturday morning, the Feast of Tabernacles, 6:30. I'm walking the dog. My phone rings. It's my daughter on the phone. She produces news for the Israeli media. And she's asking me, "Dad, where are you at?" Now, she never calls me at 6:30. Something had to be wrong. And I'm saying, "I'm walking the dog." And she said, "You go straight back home into the bomb shelter. 2,000 rockets are coming your way." That's the way how I got to know about the attack of October 7th. Israel is a sad country these days, sad but determined to accomplish our goal. And we are still recovering from a shock, and this recovery will take a long time. Something that we did not imagine in our nightmares. We know tension, we know attacks, we know wars. We understand that there was a price to pay, and that's why we have a strong army, soldiers. We did not imagine that babies will pay the price. We did not imagine that Israel will be invaded and communities will be conquered. For whole history, and we fought enough wars in the region, never in the past an Israeli community was conquered by any foreign army. 22 communities were attacked and were literally conquered by Hamas terrorists, at least for a while, until we were able to take it back before we had the ground operation into Gaza. We lost in one day, 1,400 people. Some people that celebrated in a festival just went to sing and to dance, and about 400 of those were murdered, some were kidnapped. You should see the huge fires. It took the rescuers to understand what's burning. They came to the scene, they saw big fires, they thought these are tires and cars. They got closer enough to understand these are people, human beings, being set on fire in big piles, which was absolutely horrible. I'm sorry to describe it in such a way, but children, women, men, elderly, raped in the homes, murder in the homes. This is something that no country, I believe, was going under such a tremendous shock and horror. That's how it started. Took us totally by surprise, and we are recovering ever since. So that's the impact of it.
Yes. I think the shock of that is easily lost on us. It was intentional. The Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, is a joyful celebration. They're commanded to be joyful when they celebrate. They decorate their homes and with sukkahs, they make shelters with palm branches, and they decorate them looks like our Christmas decorations and the children will sleep under the sukkahs. It's a very happy time. And Hamas took that joyful holiday to turn it into a day of massacre and slaughter. It wasn't accidental. It was a very intentional choosing of a day to inflict maximum, I think, discouragement as well as destruction. So now you're in the process of responding to that. So you've gone into Gaza and are doing your best to, I think it's hard for us to understand. Hamas builds their infrastructure and protects it with civilians. They use hospitals and schools for command centers. Am I making that up, or is that really true?
No, that's indeed the case, and we are shocked at the amount of weapons, the amount of ammunition that we discover, the amount of tunnels. We thought that Hamas has about 200 miles of tunnels, which is big enough. So far, we uncovered nearly 400 miles of tunnels and tons of ammunition. Every second house in Gaza looks like a bunker, and these are innocent civilians. I'm being cynical here, quote unquote. It's absolutely amazing. We did not believe how well Hamas was prepared. For the last 15 years, all the money given to them by the world was not to support the people, not to build an economy, was to prepare for that day. So they did take us by surprise. If I may add something, Pastor, it wasn't just the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. It's a day that we are finishing another cycle of reading the Torah. We read the Torah all year round, 52 weeks, and the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, we call it the joy of the Torah. In synagogues, communities, you finish the last verses from Deuteronomy, you go back to Genesis 1, another cycle being completed. We do that for thousands of years. It's a tradition. So the last day of the feast is also the day which is called the joy of the Torah. That was the time they chose to attack.
They literally bring the Torahs out on the street and dance with them. I mean, it is a joyful celebration for everybody.
Yeah, indeed.
If there's a silver lining in this, Israel has been as divided as our nation is. They're every bit as polarized politically as we are today. And if you haven't noticed, we're a little polarized. But that attack has united the people, at least for a season. You're standing together and working together and cooperating.
That's absolutely the case. I'm very pleased to see the level of solidarity, because entering into that after a year of conflict about political issues, about disagreements, people took to the streets because of the government's policy. It was democracy at its best. It wasn't violent, there were no casualties, and the people had the right to oppose the government's position. The problem was that it was weakening the nation, and that reflected to our neighbors as well. And the leaders were warned by army personnel that what happens in the country is giving a signal to our enemies that Israel is weak, and this is the time to attack. Nobody would listen. That's one of the tragedies of the whole story, because we knew the motivation of Hamas, we knew their intentions, we know how they see us, and that basically was kind of a big, like a cry out, Israel is weak, the time is right. But once it happened, in an instant of a second, everything was forgotten. Everything was kind of pushed aside, and you should see a tank crew, all right? 4 people in the tank. One is an Orthodox Jewish man. One is a complete liberal Jewish man. One comes from the kibbutz. One comes from the city, and they are brothers. And they fight together, and who cares about politics when you're dependent on your brothers for your life? They protect each other, brothers in arms, right? That would be the term. It's beautiful to see, I have to say. Sorry for the circumstances, but the level of solidarity is the best ever. Israelis travel around the world. When they heard that something happened, people left businesses and families. Many live in San Jose, working in Silicon Valley. People that were traveling on top of Mount Everest, when they heard that something happened, everything was pushed aside. They got on the first plane, came home to fight for the country. And that was indeed encouraging. To see that level of commitment, we always kind of patronize the next generation. We were so much better. I'm pleased to say that this generation, a generation of lions, and they're fighting like lions, and they're better than we were.
To somebody that lives in the West, and we fight a war, they're on the other side of an ocean. When you have an enemy, they're within a few hundred yards of you. And it may seem cruel to say that Hamas has to be eliminated. But if you didn't treat Hamas that way, what would it mean for Israel's future?
Well, the question is Hamas unique in that regard, or we can speak more generally about Palestinians? I mean, the question is, can you separate the good people from the bad people? And I wish there was a way to do that. They took a poll about a month ago in the West Bank about Hamas. 82% of Palestinians, 82% are supporting Hamas as a legitimate leader and supporting the vicious attack on October 7th. So are the good people among the Palestinians? I can't really tell. But no country in the world is going to live with a terror entity on its borders. This is not going to happen. We presented one peace plan after the other. 4 times, Israel presented a peace plan to the Palestinians. We tried to end this conflict. We were willing to negotiate. Prime Minister even offered part of Jerusalem just to try to work peace with the Palestinians. The answer was always no. And that was dealing with the moderates, the PLO, not Hamas. Hamas is a religious group. They have no national agenda. It's all about religion. You read the charter of Hamas. Go to Article 13. They say it loud and clear. The only solution is the total extermination of the Jews and the Christians, by the way. I have to give them one credit. They don't hide their intention. You Google Hamas charter, any language, they'll tell you right in your face, loud and clear, we are going to attack again and again and again. So we don't really have any options. If Israel wants to exist, and this is not an existential threat yet, but it may be because the neighborhood is watching. If this conflict doesn't end with the total destruction of Hamas, it may happen again. We want to teach a lesson. We want people to understand that this time gloves are off. And we're going to do whatever possible, not because we hate them that much, but we have to protect our citizens. There's not a way to do that. In Lebanon, in Hamas, Pastor, 70,000 Israelis left their homes because their community was invaded and they're refugees. And 60,000 along the Lebanese border. We have Israeli refugees in Israel, close to 130,000 people that lost basically everything. They won't be back home. They won't be back home, they say it loud and clear, unless they know their lives are not in danger anymore. And that's what we are aspiring to do, and we will. It will take some time. That will be the main objective. We are going to complete it. Otherwise, it will be very hard to live in a tough neighborhood like the Middle East.
I want to be sure we understood what he said, that there's more than 100,000 Israelis today that have been evacuated out of their homes. In the south, about 70,000 in the region along Gaza. And in the north, which for those of you who have been there, in the Golan Heights, everything north of Katzrim, basically.
Well, it's more down in the mountains of Galilee, Caesarea Philippi to the west. Golan Heights, they did not evacuate people from the Golan Heights. You cannot visit, it's a closed military area. But evacuation took from a town called Kiryat Shmona in the valley and all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, a strip of about 4 or 5 miles. Everything that was within the range of Hezbollah's rockets and missiles, people evacuated. They left behind livestock and farms. Somebody has to work and somebody has to collect the eggs, etc. And all that industry will have to be rebuilt and reinstalled.
So 60,000 people in the north have been evacuated, and they've tried to keep them together as communities. So they put them in hotels or wherever they could to keep them as families, to keep those communities together. And the other Israelis have rallied to put together schools and provide opportunities for the children. Their lives are completely disrupted, turned upside down. And that was October. We're nearing the end of January. So the displacement as a result of the Hamas attack hasn't just been to the people living in Gaza. The nation that was attacked has been significantly disrupted as well.
Yeah, interesting. They interviewed a tank field commander, and he said, listen, I'm here to protect our people. But if the people are not here, who am I protecting? Just empty houses. It was a nice way to put it, and nobody thought about it. You want to save lives. It was important to order people to evacuate. The country pays for it, but it was somehow kind of bothering the troops, because that's the idea. We protect them so they won't have to leave the homes. If they're leaving homes, we have failed at least to do that. So that's another way to view at some of the, I will say, the approach of the military to what happens.
The Middle East is a complex place, and it's impossible to understand it in 90-second sound bites on the evening news. Hamas is a representative of Iran. And so the permission to do what they did ultimately had to come from Iran. And it's a nation we've been giving billions of dollars to now for quite a season. We've removed our sanctions on them. It's predictable. In a previous administration, the Abraham Accords were worked out, which strengthened relationships with the Israelis and the Saudis and some other Arab nations, diminishing Iran. When the current administration came in and we removed the sanctions on Iran, gave them billions of dollars, took the sanctions away, their petroleum dollars were flowing again. They had the resources to start to fund their proxies in the region, Hamas, Hezbollah, and in order to reassert their authority in the Muslim world, an attack on Israel is not a surprise at all. So what we're watching is a result of policies that go far beyond Israel. The hatred for the Jewish people is a part of Hamas's charter. You give them the opportunity, they're committed to that.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel. You know the drill. Hit the bell for notifications. If you want to, leave a comment.